So thank you, Donald, for that. Yes, so yeah, I'm Adrian Morton, and my talk is on how to win at sports using maths. As you can tell from the picture, it's not using a calculator to play table tennis. This is the only way I could really use to demonstrate how I have a background in both maths and sport with a Venn diagram. It was the only appropriate way to do so. So I'm going to go through a little bit of background. I hope you don't mind me talking about me for a little bit. So as Donald mentioned, I did my undergraduate, 2 years ago, here in Stirling. And yeah, in the final year of my studies in Stirling, I decided to set up a website looking at the use of mathematics in sport. This is the one that the talk will be posted on later. So it's called The Game is Afoot. So that's there on the Venn diagram. So then I finished my undergraduate and finished here in Stirling and thought, where shall I go to next? I decided to do another maths degree in Stirling. So I did mathematics PhD. This wasn't focused on sports. This was looking at the environment, the effect of climate change on tick-borne diseases, which has slight implications for sport in that grouse shooting is hugely affected by ticks. But I don't really consider shooting animals in the face a sport, but there you are. I finished my PhD. That was me. I've kind of got through everything that Stirling University had to offer. So going into the wider world, I then went on to teach mathematics at Stirling University. And it's nice to see some of my current and former students here tonight. As well as this, as Donald mentioned, I now do some work as a football analyst, do kind of 2 jobs in this field, and I'll be drawing on some of this experience and some of the things I've learnt in today's talk. In order to complete the Venn diagram, I'd need to fill in the empty areas. So the bit of sports that's not in maths, I'm an avid sports fan, as Don mentioned, it is one of my passions, more or less. Hopefully you'll get a feeling of the breadth of sports that I'm into, and you'll also pick up a few of the sports I'm not into. And the area outside the Venn diagram, neither maths or sport, eating, I don't know. So in today's talk in general, I'm going to be looking at something I call off-field mathematics. This is mathematics that doesn't affect how sport is played on the field. So this might be cases where the sport will tell us something cool about mathematics. It might be cases where the maths tells us how something in sport works. But I'll go through all the different cases in a bit. But there's what I call the Moneyball revolution. This is where you're probably mainly familiar with the term Moneyball or the film Moneyball or whatever. This changed how maths and sport interact, and I'll be looking at that. And then this is affecting how maths then enters the field of play. So maths now starts to affect how sport is played. And I'll be looking at the future of this new field, sports analysis. But I'm going to start by starting quite mathematically. But this is just beautiful. This is one of my favourite examples of maths and sport colliding. Those of you who are from a more mathematical background, thinking of my Venn diagram, I think that some of you here will be more in the maths circle, some of you will be more in the sports circle, some of you might be neither. Hopefully you'll find something in today's talk. So this is, these are 4 shapes that together are known as conic sections. These are found by slicing through a cone. If we imagine that this cone extends off to infinity, we can get these different shapes by slicing through the cone. I'll go through the different shapes and explain how they work. The first of them is the circle at the top. The circle you can get if you slice through the cone perfectly horizontally. This will leave a circle, as well demonstrated by this brief clip from the seminal 1989 short movie Wallace and Gromit: A Grand Day Out. That's then slicing through a cone and we're left with a circle. So this is a circle. I'm sure you're all familiar with circles. But we can define a circle. We've got a point in the middle of it, and we've got a perimeter of it. We're just defining the circle as the perimeter of the circle. Every single point on this circle is the same distance away from that centre. So we can define a circle by just saying where the centre of it is, and then how far all the points are away from this point. In a similar way, an ellipse is the next one. An ellipse is defined in a similar way. An ellipse you could get if you cut through the cone at an angle a bit shallower than the side of the cone. You'll go through into the curved side and come out of the curved side, and you end up with this kind of stretched circle. Mathematically, it's very similar to how the Circle is defined. We've got, but in this case, we've got 2 points. These are known as foci, or singularly a focus. And the definition of the ellipse is that every single point on the ellipse, I can't point at that screen, I need to point at this screen, has the same distance from here to here, and then from here to here. Any given point on the edge of it has the same, if you add up its distance to the 2 foci. That's the definition of an ellipse. I'm not going to test you, so I won't go into the full details of it. The next one is a parabola. For those of you who have done maths to a certain level, a parabola will be familiar to you as the curve that's associated with a quadratic equation, so anything that involves x squared generally. You would get this if you cut through the cone at an angle the same as the side of the cone. This goes through the cone, it makes a parabola, which is nice. I appreciate that you don't know why I'm telling you all this, but it does come up. The final one is the most abstract, I would say, hyperbola, which generally comes in pairs. This is when you cut through the cone at an angle steeper than the side of the cone. So you go through the cone and you go through the bottom. It makes this curve that seems to flatten out as you extend away. If we imagine that there's a second cone which meets point to point with the cone that you can see, this line will go up and it will cut through the other cone, which is why there's 2 curves. Anyway, so these are four shapes. They have a special place in mathematics. The conic sections, that's all hopefully mildly interesting. And now I'm going to make a non sequitur and start talking about how we score points in rugby. And you'll see why in a bit. There's 3 main ways you can score points in rugby. There's a drop kick where you drop the ball and kick it and it goes through the posts over the crossbar. There's a penalty where you do the same but the ball's fixed on the ground. And the one that I want to look at, which is a try, which is where you run the ball, you go into one of these zones at the end, you go past the post and you place the ball down on the ground there. Most of you will be familiar with this. If you do score a try, you can then get bonus points by scoring what's called conversion. This is basically like a penalty, but it has to be on the same line going horizontally on this diagram as horizontally. I found this in this room. I love this stick. It has to be along the same line as where the try was grounded. That's the only rule, really. So, take some examples. I will use the 3 tries that Scotland scored against England 10 days ago, because I want you to like me. So, the first try, which was Hugh Jones, was just underneath the posts. Because the try was scored here, the conversion could be taken across this line, anywhere on this line. Second try in the corner, Sean Maitland? Is it Sean? Yeah, Sean Maitland. In the corner means the conversion could be taken anywhere on this line. And then the third try, Hugh Jones again. The conversion could be taken anywhere on this line. Where do you take the kick from, though? Naturally, your instinct would be to take it from as close to the post as possible. If you're thinking about kicking from here or kicking from where that weird podium is at the back of the room, it's obviously easier to kick from here. Let's pretend for a moment that we don't need to worry about clearing the crossbar. However, if you're out at an angle, let's say try was scored over here. Let's say these 2 microphones are the posts. Where you are, Donald, you've got a very, very shallow angle to score between these posts. It's very narrow. You might be someone over here might have the best angle. So you will actually need to start moving further back. It's fairly obvious and it's something that we understand quite innately without needing the mathematics. In real life, these are where the 3 kicks were taken from, and you can see that the further out wide you were, the more further back you're going to want to take the kick from. This is a relatively simple geometric problem in mathematics. We've got 2 points here. Let's say the x is where the try has been grounded. We don't really care how far into the try zone it is because it's just in line, so we'll just take where it is on the try line. So, I'm not going to go into how it's found, but this is the way mathematically to find the optimal place to take the kick. If we take the 2 posts as the foci of an ellipse, and we take the distance away where the try was scored as the distance of as one of the points on the ellipse, we can then draw an ellipse. We have the definition. We've got the 2 foci, and we've got a distance from the foci to the edge. We know that the try has to be scored somewhere along where this yellow line is, and if we draw a line from the point furthest away from the goal, well, by definition they're all the same distance away, furthest away on this vertical axis. If we draw a line going across sideways, then the optimal place to take a kick, geometrically, is where these two lines meet, which is, I think, quite cool. Now, for any point on across the try line where the try has been scored, there's going to be an optimal place to take the kick. And if we plot all these optimal places to take a kick, we find that we get a hyperbola, where the foci of the hyperbola happen to be the posts. So immediately we've found a connection with ellipses and hyperbola. If we're thinking about mechanics, when you actually go to take the kick, it's going to travel in a parabola. So this is all starting to become quite satisfying from a mathematical point of view. We can use an ellipse to find a point on a hyperbola to then kick a ball in a parabola. If only the ball was a circle. So that's just, this first bit is really just a collection of little stories. That's the first one. The second one is a use of using mathematics and statistics to address some conceptions or misconceptions in sport. These are two separate ones, but they're both linked. On the left, this deals with a thing in football generally, it might apply in other sports as well, known as the new manager bounce. The team aren't doing very well, so they sack the manager, new manager comes in, and it's general accepted law that the new manager will do better. There's always a bounce results from getting a new manager. As this article has somewhat optimistically suggested, clubs should therefore just hire a manager for a month, sack him, hire a new manager, and do that every month, which we'll hopefully address to see why it is wrong. On the other end, we have a thing called the Sports Illustrated jinx. This is something in America. Sports Illustrated is their biggest sports magazine, and each month they have a high-performing sports star on the cover. And so someone's doing very well, they put them on the cover. And then there's a thing called the Sports Illustrated jinx, where they just don't do as well in the next month, which is too bad. So this can be expressed using, we can kind of cover this using mathematics, and I've set up an experiment to help us deal with this. So I've had Felix look at here. Because we're doing an experiment. I mean, this is so neat. What Felix has been doing, this is simulating the new manager bounce. I'm looking on there, it's not there yet. Okay, so this is the result. I gave him 2 coins, 1p and a 2p, and asked him to just keep flicking the coin and recording the result. Let's pretend that a heads is a win, a tails is a defeat. And if a coin has had 2 defeats in a row, then it's obviously not doing well enough, and it needs to be sacked. So if there's 2 tails in a row, we sack the coin and we get the other coin in. And then we see if the coin has done better when we've changed it. So along the top, so this is great. This is the start of looking at. This is how statistics starts getting recorded in sport. This is like being a cricket scorer. Along the top of the result when we've changed the coin. So bearing in mind that all of these are being compared to tossing 2 tails in a row. So we've tossed 2 tails in a row here, 2 tails in a row, changed the coin, and we've got 1 tail, 1 head. That's an improvement. We've gone from getting no heads to 1 out of 2. This is great. This looks like it works. We got 2 tails here. Now we've got a head tail. Fantastic. 2 tails here. Head tails. 2 tails. Tails heads. 2 heads, and so on. I think on average you can probably see that it's maybe about 1 out of 2 heads. So this is great. We've gone from averaging no heads to averaging 1 out of 2 heads. This is 50% improvement. I'm sure you can all see what's wrong about this. This is a thing called regression to the mean. Something should be performing at a mean, at an average, and in the long run it will tend towards it. But it might have dips and it might have troughs. And what we've found is manager performance is exactly the same. This is a visualizer. Let me go back to the slide. So this is a study done by a Dutch economist, I think, looking at the performance of a team. On the left is how this team did before an event. We'll ignore the one on the top. This is when a manager resigns. We have 2. If you can see where the circles, this is when the manager was sacked. So their performance, the y-axis is showing the team's performance against their long-term average. When it dips to 50% of their long-term average, we look at all the teams that have then sacked their manager. So that's here. And then look at how the new manager's done. And we can see that there's an improvement. They keep improving. The triangle is when they've done exactly the same, but they've decided to keep the manager. And it dips. And the new one actually, when it's the same manager, he actually seems to do even better. It goes back above the average, so that's great. So what this generally shows us is that some conceptions in sports can be explained by basically random fluctuation. Not always, of course, some managers are rubbish, some managers are great, but actually, certainly at an elite level, they're all going to be pretty good. Okay, so that's a little experiment. We'll move on to a new one now. This is where we're going to use maths and statistics to get a broader idea of the underlying performance or the underlying behaviour of teams or countries or individuals. You might recognise the individuals on the screen. This is some of Team GB's most high-performing Olympians and Paralympians across winter and summer. So we've got Alistair Brownlee of Yorkshire at the top. Next to him is Johnny Peacock, who is the amputee sprinter in the Summer Paralympics. On the bottom left is Lizzie Arnold, who won gold in the skeleton at the Winter Olympics just gone. And on the bottom right is Kelly Gallagher, who won gold in Sochi 4 years ago in the blind downhill skiing. And I thought doing this talk was scary. So that's her on the right, and then on the left is her guide. I can't remember, Charlotte. I can't remember. Anyway, yes. So, and actually, just out of interest, the Winter Paralympics start tonight. If you're interested to see some absolutely brilliant sports, you might guess from this. I love the Paralympics. I really like the Paralympics. I think the Paralympics are better than the Olympics. I find it more heartwarming. I find it more exciting. Like, some of the sports are cooler. Wheelchair rugby is like the best one I've ever seen, honest. Yeah, I think the Paralympics is great, and I think that if a country performs well in the Paralympics, I think that's fantastic, because I think that country has put in more effort into making sure that its disabled athletes can achieve the best that they can. So I was curious to know which countries have the best performing Paralympians. But obviously all countries aren't equal. Some have greater natural resources in terms of population, in terms of wealth, which isn't really a natural resource, but it is when it comes to sport. But all of these factors are the same that affect the Olympics. So if a country has a great innate Olympics ability, it should have a great innate Paralympics ability, because it's got all those factors in place. So my theory is that we can weight a Paralympic performance by a team's Olympic performance and get an idea of how well they're backing their Paralympic athletes. So if we look at this is a graph. I took the 20 highest performing nations. You don't need to worry about it too much, because I'm going to do a Hall of Fame and a Hall of Shame. So let's quickly go through the top 5. In 5th, we've got Australia. So their Paralympic athletes perform, on average, 1.96% better. I should say as well, the range is from the turn of the millennium, so 2000 onwards. In 5th is Spain, 2.27% of the Paralympians perform better. In 3rd, bronze, Team GB, excellent, 2.68% better. And that's really good, because you'll probably all be aware of how well Team GB have done in the last few Olympics. They've really improved. Paralympians even better. In 2nd is China, and again, China, great results recently in the Olympics, but the Paralympians even better, fantastic stuff. And top is Ukraine, which is possibly a more surprising one. We can think about the reasons for this. Ukraine, 30 years ago, had a huge nuclear accident at Chernobyl. The result, what the government did after this, was it poured money into funding for disabled sports, because they anticipated an increase in participants. So this explains why Ukraine overachieved. Does anyone know the connection between the other 4 countries? No immediate. In terms of Olympics and Paralympics?
3 of them are recent hosts.
Which 3?
China, Britain and Australia.
Spain hosted the 1996 Olympics as well. So that's exactly it. All 4 of them have hosted Olympics either within or just before the range that we're looking at. So again, we can't take certain guarantees from this, but maybe because they're hosting it, they've decided that we're hosting the Olympics, we're also hosting the Paralympics. We're going to put the funding into the Paralympians and try and get them to the level, try and get them do as well as possible. And because countries don't necessarily fund the Paralympians as well, there's more room for growth there. So it gives us a bit of an idea of some underlying behaviour. Now let's do the bottom 5. So we've got South Korea, minus 1.29%. They're currently hosting they're going to be hosting the Winter Paralympics in a day. So we'll see if that improves their performance. I haven't included the results from Pyeongchang, Winter Olympics because there's no Paralympics to weight it against. There's Norway, the most successful Winter Olympic side of all time, but not the most successful Winter Paralympic side of all time, I don't think. Italy in third, 1.4% decrease. Russia in second, and a whopping minus 4.44% is the USA. Huge decrease, and I think that using statistics in this way, it just gives us an idea of seeing which countries are backing their disabled athletes the best. The USA, I'm not actually that surprised to see them that far, because I think that they take the Olympics very, very seriously as a show of strength, exactly the same with the Russians. I also think that the USA really could do a lot better in terms of supporting its disabled athletes. I don't even think they show the Paralympics on proper TV. Anyway, so this is a way we can use statistics to have an idea of the behaviour of clubs, teams, players, nations in this case. And the next thing I want to talk about, some of you will be very experienced in wider mathematics and will have an idea of which areas of mathematics are most related to sports. If we think about them all, I imagine that a lot of you will have expected me to cover game theory, covering the mathematics of games, which sport can be boiled down to. For those of you who aren't familiar with game theory, I'll just give a quick overview. Game theory is based on usually two participants, certainly on the simple level we're going to look at. Each one has to make a decision independently, not knowing what the other one does, but there's some outcome based on what they both do. So this is the most famous one. Generally, this is known as the prisoner's dilemma. We have two prisoners in prison, and they've been given the option to either stay silent or try and incriminate their colleague. Let's go with colleague. If they both stay silent, then they both get sentenced to 1 year in prison. If they both dog the other one in, they get sentenced to 2 years in prison each. If one betrays the other one stays silent, then the one who has been betrayed gets sentenced to 3 years in prison. If we think about the global best position, if I'm the boss of the prison, if I'm the boss of the criminals, and I want them to serve between them the least time in prison, then obviously the best one is when they both serve 1 year in prison. And the worst one is when they both serve 2 years in prison, because that's a total of 2 years. This is a total of 4, and each of these is a total of 3. So in terms of the collective best case scenario, it's when they both stay silent. However, let's say I'm actually prisoner A. If I assume that prisoner B has stayed silent, then I'll go to prison for 1 year if I stay silent. But if I betray him, then I go to prison for no years at all. So that's better for me. So it's better for me to betray him in that case. If prisoner B betrays me, then if I stay silent, then I go to prison for 3 years. But if I betray him, I go to prison for 2 years. Again, in both cases, it's better for me to be a betrayer. Prisoner B has exactly the same dilemma, which means that this system ends up with what's called a stable solution. No one will change their mind, knowing what the other one has picked. But for this case, where they both actually end up picking the worst case scenario for the system as a whole. This isn't related to sports, but there's lots of cases where we can use game theory in sports. Some of you might be thinking of doing maths instead later on, and if you do a project on game theory where you get to make a poster. So this is the one that I did when I was an undergraduate. I chose to look at penalty shootouts. So you can have a look at this. I'm going to outline some of the key points from the poster. Penalty shootouts are absolutely perfect for game theory because you've got two people, you've got a kicker and a saver, and they've both got to try and make a decision. We could boil this down into left or right, but if you think about it, left-footed, you might have right-footed and left-footed players, and there's a natural way that you try and kick the ball. When you go to kick the ball, it's easier to kick across yourself, so if you're right-footed, it's easier to kick towards the left, and if you're left-footed, it's easier to kick towards the right. So it's basically left or right, but we're going to describe this as natural side and unnatural side. So your natural side is, if you're right-footed, it's over to the left, if you're left-footed, it's over to the right. So, as the kicker, I can choose to go that way, and as the goalkeeper, I can choose to dive to the player's natural or unnatural side. There's a fantastic study being done by a Spanish economist, Ignacio Palacios Huerta, and he looked at all the different results when the taker and the goalkeeper dived and shot in the two ways. These are the outcomes. This is how likely the shot is to go into the goal. So we can see here, obviously we would expect that when they both go in the same direction, the chance is lower. So if I shoot to my natural side and the goalkeeper dives to his natural side, it's obviously lower than if he dived the other way. And we can see this here. In game theory, we can apply something called a minimax method. So let's take it from the point of view as the taker. What they will do is actually something called maxi-min, where they look at all the minimums of each possible choice they could make. What's the worst case scenario for each choice I make, and then try and choose the best of those. So if they shoot to their natural side, the worst case scenario is a 70% success rate. If they shoot to their unnatural side, the worst case is 58%. So if they always shoot to their natural side, then they've guaranteed at least 70%, which is better than 58. The goalkeeper will do the same, except that he wants to minimise it, so he uses mini-max. So he looks at all the maximums and tries to have the minimum one. Again, he's trying to mitigate his worst case scenario. So here, if he dives to his natural side, the worst case scenario for him is 92. If he dives to his unnatural side, the worst case scenario is 95%. In this case, he chooses the natural side. So they've both chosen the natural side. That should be the stable solution, but of course it's not a stable solution, because then the taker will know that the goalkeeper knows this. And the taker will then decide to shoot to his unnatural side, but then the goalkeeper knows that, the taker knows that he knows that he's going to dive to the natural side, so he's going to dive to his unnatural side, but then the taker knows that the goalkeeper knows that he knows. So this goes around in a cycle. Obviously there's no stable solution. You don't have every penalty taker going, I will definitely kick this way, and the goalkeeper goes, I will definitely dive this way. So what we want is the best strategy we can find is a percentage of shooting in one way this percentage of the time, and shooting in the other way the other percentage of the time. So the way that we do this is, I'm going to be using the visualizer again. So I was going to use the whiteboard, but we had problems with it last week. So if we imagine, I'm going to draw a graph, so brace yourselves. Where am I? Here. Okay, so if you imagine along the x-axis, this is the percentage of time I shoot to my natural side. So this is 0%, always shooting to my unnatural side. 100% shooting to the natural side. I'll have this axis as being the likelihood of scoring. So this is 100% likely to score, there's 50%. And I'm just going to draw the same axis on this side to help with my drawing. I'm going to use two colours. Let's use pink to say that the goalkeeper, let's say the goalkeeper dives to his unnatural side. See, when I've done this before, I had the stats on the screen to read, but good matter. So if the goalkeeper dives, let's say to his natural side, natural side, then, based on the statistics from before, I know that if I always shoot to my unnatural side, then, based on those statistics, I'll have a 92% chance of scoring. If I always shoot to my natural side, I will have a 70% chance of scoring, just based on the table from before. I'm not going to the maths, but in between these 2 points, this is a straight line. So if I was to shoot 50% of the time on the natural side, then I would expect to score, and let's say the goalkeeper always dives to his natural side, I'd expect to score halfway between 92 and 70, which is 81%. Now I'm going to draw a second line. We use red. No, red's really close to pink. Let's use blue. This is when the goalkeeper dives to his unnatural side. Unnatural side. Again, just using the same method as before, I know that if I'm always shooting to my unnatural side and the goalkeeper dives to his unnatural side, I have a 58% chance of scoring. Dear, oh dear. That's close enough, given my handwriting. If he dives to his unnatural side and I shoot to my natural side, then there's a 95% chance of scoring. And again, we have a straight line between the two. So, the goalkeeper, let's say the goalkeeper knows this because he's a great game theorist. If I am always shooting to my unnatural side, he can look at the lines and go, if I dive to my unnatural side, this suits me, that my chances of scoring are lower. Similarly, if I always shoot to my natural side, the goalkeeper is obviously going to always dive to his natural side because the chance is lower. In fact, the only place on the diagram where the goalkeeper can't pick a method that reduces my chance of scoring is in the middle. So if I go for where these two lines meet, this is where there's the less chance of. This is where the goalkeeper can't pick a strategy that mitigates, that changes my likelihood of scoring. You can set this up as equations. You either probably already done this in maths or you're just not interested in how you do it. So we've got some percentage, X% of shooting this way. Set these equations up. If we do, we find that where this meets is at 57.6%. That's how frequently I should shoot to my natural side. Okay, and the goalkeeper could do a similar style analysis and find that he should dive to my natural side at 62.7% of the time. Okay, and again, if we put these back into the same equation, this will result in 79.3% of penalties being scored. Okay, so I apologise for my handwriting, but I'm left-handed. So this is how game theory is used to find what's called a mixed strategy. And out of interest, I happened to look at the penalties taken in the English Premier League from about 2000 to 2011 when I did this talk, and it was 80.02%, which is terrible handwriting. But that's pretty close to 79.3%. I think that we can find that footballers are basically far better game theorists than we give them credit for. In fact, the title of the paper that this Spanish economist did with similar conclusions called Professionals Play Minimax. So this economist actually, in 2008, Manchester United played Chelsea in the final of the Champions League. He sent a report looking at all his data to the Chelsea manager, Avram Grant. He noticed that the Manchester United goalkeeper, Edwin van der Sar, primarily he overdived to the taker's natural side. He dived to this side way too often, bearing in mind that we know how often it should be. So he told Chelsea team, we don't know for sure that Chelsea used this, but if we look at the results of what Chelsea did, we can see. So it went to penalties, which is great for drama and whatnot. So these are the Chelsea penalties. Bear in mind that more players will shoot to their natural side. It is where they're inclined to shoot. So the first player was Michael Ballack. He shot to his unnatural side and scored. Van der Sar went the wrong way. Second one was Giuliano Belletti. He went to his unnatural side again and scored. Third one, Frank Lampard, exactly the same. Fourth one, this is a slightly different one. This is Ashley Cole, left-footed player. He shot to his natural side, which is the unnatural side of a right footer. So he didn't follow the strategy, but he did shoot in that direction. And again, he scored. At this point, Manchester United missed the kick, which gave Chelsea the chance to win. And John Terry, again, he shot to his unnatural side, but he slipped, he hit the post, and they missed the chance to win. And it wasn't at all funny. I don't know what you're laughing at. Again, Chelsea's sixth penalty, Salomon Kalou. Incredibly, he scored his, and it was a great penalty right up to the top. At this point, you could see a pattern, you think. So the Manchester United goalkeeper, Edwin van der Sar, had also noticed a pattern. And if we look before the seventh penalty, he's telling the next taker, Nicolas Anelka, all your pals have shot that way. So Nicolas Anelka bottled it. He didn't follow the team strategy. He shot to his natural side. Edwin van der Sar saved it, and Manchester United won. So it's weird. I think that the pattern suggests that they very strongly that they did use the game theory that was devised. We don't know for sure, and it's weird to use this as an example when they lost. But if Ashley Cole had followed the strategy and not given Van der Sar a clue, then maybe Nicolas Anelka scored. And of course, if John Terry hadn't slipped, then Chelsea would have won. So it was a very close. Anyway, so this is an example of maths affecting what's being used on the field, maybe. As I mentioned before, we're now going to look at this, what I call the Moneyball revolution, an act in three parts. This first one here is a guy called Bill James, who really is the star of the show, a statistician. This story became a book called Moneyball, and then later a film, got nominated for an Oscar. Brad Pitt. Sadly, Brad Pitt didn't play the statistician because, I feel like that would have fitted. But I won't go into the plot of Moneyball because I can let this clip from one of my favourite shows tell you instead. For context, they're looking at how to make their police, people in charge of police precincts, they're looking to try and make it more efficient.
We've done it, sir. If we stay on this pace, I think we'll finish on time.
I think we should keep going. Make the office even more efficient.
Sir, are you familiar with the story of Icarus? He didn't know when to quit. He flew too close to the sun, and his wax wings melted, and he died.
Are you familiar with the story of Moneyball? A man uses statistics and logic to win several baseball games. It's my favorite film.
Statistical analysis. It's so beautiful.
And who hasn't thought that when watching a movie? So, just to go back to actually Bill James himself and what did he do? Every year he published a thing called Baseball Abstract, where he basically came up with his own form of statistics for baseball. He'd look at all the different things. Baseball is quite a lot, for some of you who are more familiar with cricket, it's a similar sport in that statistics has always been a huge part of it. Averages, that type of thing, always a fundamental part of it. In fact, baseball even more so. So what he looked at it, but he focused more on does this kind of key statistic actually affect the team's chances of winning, and he found that traditional metrics for measuring player quality were misleading because many of the standard tactics were bad strategies. So this player might be very good at doing this thing, but this thing actually didn't end up leading to this team winning. So this player was being valued for doing something which looked good, or was at least deemed to be good, but wasn't actually having much of a positive effect on the team's chances. In exactly the same way, because they were overvaluing the wrong things, there was inefficiencies in player recruitment because they had the tactics wrong. So, in conclusion, they decided that a team could get a huge advantage over its competitors by analysing the data that was available. This became known as sabermetrics, which is one of my least favourite names. It comes from the Society of American Baseball Research, and then they stuck an E in the wrong place and then put metrics on it, which is not one of my favourites. But anyway, this is the real start of the use of maths and statistics in sport. The outcome from this is the Oakland Athletics. This is the team that the movie and the book really focus on. They adopted sabermetrics, and their side, which was a really small side, ended up getting into the playoffs 2 years in a row. I don't know enough about baseball to give you much context beyond that. And then even more high profile, really, 2003, the Boston Red Sox hired Bill James, and this was meant to be a curse club. They hadn't won the World Series for 86 years, but they did the year after in 2004, and they added 2 more as well within the next decade, which is quite a good success story. Actually, the owners of Boston Red Sox also own Liverpool Football Club, and I could do a whole new talk about how Liverpool's owners have tried to incorporate sabermetrics into football, but I won't. And the legacy of this is that sabermetrics type approaches are now being adopted across almost every sport you can think of. So I'm going to focus now on football, how this type of thing has moved into the realm of football, because this is my area of expertise. And it might surprise you to know that the use of this style of analysis in football dates back to the 50s, really, with this guy, Wing Commander Charles Reap, in the RAF, who is an accountant, and he recorded data on several matches, including the 1958 World Cup final, which I think he had like a roll of wallpaper and you could just write it and reel it along, which is amazing. He'd have a miner's helmet on and just incredible. So this guy, he went to all these matches and recorded as many events as he could, and using his accountancy training found a shorthand of doing so. He paired up with a chap, his surname's Benjamin, I've forgotten his first name, it begins with B and it's not Benjamin, from the Royal Statistical Society, and they together, Benjamin took Reap's data, and together they made this paper called Skill and Chance in Association Football. I'm not just going to read it to you. The key thing, if I move the mouse to the thing here, is they're looking at chains of passes, so an R-pass movement. How many passes was in a move in football? Did this move have 3 passes in it? Did this move have 0 passes in it? That type of thing. This was the results they got. The green bar represents what they actually observed. These are matches around the 50s and the 60s. The numbers of passes in a move. So around 40% here had no passes in. They failed at the first pass. Just over 25% had 1 pass, and so on and so on. You can see that it's decreasing as we go along. Just kind of for statistical nerds amongst you, the grey bar represents the negative binomial distribution. They noticed that this met this discrete probability distribution, which for those of you who are in my Into class, that's what we're doing tomorrow. So yeah, they found that it met this really well, which is quite good. I also happened to be looking through his data and noticed that about a third of his matches focused on Sheffield Wednesday, so I had to separate Sheffield Wednesday's results. That's my team. And we can see here that they've got far more zero passes, far more one passes and less of the high passes. And based on our recent results, I'm not surprised. Nothing ever changes. You get neckache going to Hillsborough. What did they find from the, what did they surmise from this paper? They noticed that 2 out of every 9 goals came from a move with over 3 passes, which isn't very many. They thought, you're not scoring many goals if you're passing it about a lot. And actually, only 8.5% of moves even reached a 5th player. And around half of the goals started by getting the ball in the opposition box. So their conclusion was you can maximise your chance of scoring by kicking it long and putting pressure on the opposition in the final third. And this is the mistake. They've effectively proved the opposite, but I'll go back to see why. They're saying that passing is bad. The more you pass, the less chance you've got of scoring. But they made a huge statistical error. 8.5% of passing moves reached a 5th player. In other words, they've had at least 4 passes in them. So if 8.5% have 4 or more, if these are reducing your chances of scoring, then you would expect less than 8.5% of goals to come from moves of this type, because if it's decreasing your chance, then it should go down. But if 2 out of every 9 came from moves with at least 4 passes in, that's 22%. That's far higher than 8.5%. So actually, the more you pass, the higher your chance of scoring is. So they proved... They founded the tactics that the Spanish Barcelona dominance of recent football is built on, and then concluded that you should play like Stoke. So that was a huge mistake. The outcome of this, actually it started quite well. Brentford employed Reap in this season. They actually improved. As soon as they hired him, they basically doubled their scoring rate. But in the long term, Reapite, someone who kind of follows Charles Reap's teachings, a guy called Charles Hughes became the director of coaching at the FA in the 1980s. He was also great friends with Graham Taylor, who later went on to manage England during one of their less successful phases. And largely this led to generations of English footballers really being favoured for athleticism rather than technique. And I think if you follow football right now, you'll see that this is really against the prevailing trends. Teams are doing much better if they can pass the ball, if they can tire out the opposition. I would say that their point about pressing the opposition high up the pitch from a football point of view is actually a very good thing. This is something that very successful teams right now use, but I don't want to start getting into football tactics too much. And the long-term effect of this is that statistics became quite unfashionable in football up until at least Moneyball, and even still beyond then. So things have evolved since then, and there's all sorts of things I could talk about when we're looking at analysing and using modern statistics to analyse football. The one that I'm going to focus on is a thing called expected goals. You'll see this. You may see this referred to as X goals or XG. This is getting quite mainstream now. Match of the Day and BBC is beginning to use this in their analysis. So if we're trying to understand which team has done better in a game, you go on to, your team has played, you go on to the news and you see these statistics. We've got team 1 have had 18 shots, team 2 have had 14 shots. Which team do you think's won? Team 1, they've had more shots. Sometimes it will also tell you how many shots were on target. So at the moment, team 2 have had 10 shots on target, team 1 have had 8 shots on target. It's not very clear. You would love to know more information to know which team is actually playing better. So let's look at whereabouts on the pitch the shots have been taken. This is giving us much more. This is what we really want. Now we can see team 1 are shooting to the right, team 2 are shooting to the left. So now I think that you can start to get an idea. Team 1, their shots, I'm going to use the mouse. They've got lots of shots from outside the box. They've got shots from out on the wings, and there's not many from the centre of the box where you'd expect most chances to be scored. Team 2, the opposite. There's not many shots from outside the box. We've got loads of shots concentrated in this just around the penalty spot area. So from that we're getting an idea. And this is really the fundamental aspect of expected goals. Expected goals basically take in as many factors as we understand about the chance. If we can see how many players are in the way, is somebody pushing the striker, is he under pressure, is the goalkeeper in the right place, is it a shot with his head, is it a shot on his favoured foot, and we can come up with an estimate of how good the chance is. So if I colour in these shots with how good they are, we can again begin to get an idea of how well these teams are playing. Green is a very good chance, orange or dark orange is a very bad chance. Again, if we look at team 1, these are rubbish chances, these are pretty good. But Team 2, lots of high quality chances in the centre of the box. We can then add up, so each individual shot has a probability of being scored. If we add up all of these probabilities, we get some idea of how many goals we would expect this team to score. So in this case, if we add up all the ones for Team 1, using the estimations I gave them, then the expected goals would be 2.43 for Team 2. Oops. I wonder what match I'm talking about. Team 2, 3.68. What match am I talking about? Well, it happened to be the famous one between Brazil and Germany. It's a World Cup year, so 4 years ago, where Brazil lost home soil to Germany so heavily that the BBC had to write in words in case you thought that it was a typing error. That goes back to like the 1950 World Cup when England played for the first time and everyone assumed England were the best, and they lost 1-0 to the USA, and everyone thought that the newspapers meant to say 10-1 and they just said 0-1. So that's anyway. So we got an idea of which team was doing better. So what are the broader uses of using expected goals? So this is a more reliable way of judging which team is performing better than just looking at their result. The result in a football match is based on 1, 2, 0, 3, 4 goals, not very many. In terms of statistics, that's a terrible sample size. But they're going to have lots more shots, and if we can find out more information about those shots, then we get a much stronger idea of how that team is performing. There's numerous examples that way we see a team underperform, but actually look at their expected goals data and you see that they're playing pretty well. They just need their strikers to shoot a bit better or to stop playing against goalkeepers having great days. I've been kind of working on doing this in the Scottish Premier League, and I did this after about 5 games, looked at the table, found, I think Dundee had a shocking start to the season. I think they lost every match in the first 5 this season, or something like that anyway. But they were performing pretty well, and in the long run they've moved away from the bottom zone, and there's teams that were overperforming that have now regressed to the mean. We can then use this to give a rating for the shooting quality of players. If this player should have scored, using his expected goals, 10 goals, but he actually scored 15, then he's overperforming, and this gives us an estimation that he's pretty good at shooting. He's only had half chances, he scored lots of goals, or vice versa. In the same way, we can use it to rate a goalkeeper. Goalkeeper might be facing some easy shots, but he's let in 5 goals, and it's not very good. We can also rate the quality of creation. If we record where my pass ends up, add them all up together, we can see how many chances I should have created. So using this, we're getting a proper idea now of how strong each individual player is, and we can then build a profile as to how good this player is. There's now whole generations of football fans in particular who are growing up with looking at player attributes like this. This is the sports game Football Manager. It's pretty similar in FIFA, which is the most played, it's basically the most played video game in the world, I think. And you can just immediately look at this picture and get a bit of a snapshot of what type of player he is, what is he strong at, what is he weak at. This type of graph is called a radar graph, and we use this quite a lot. There's a fantastic company and accompanying blog called StatsBomb. They do the same thing. This is using real life data though. They're creating similar graphs. So here's for a couple of players telling us exactly what type of player they are, what are they good at. So this is some of the uses of this. But going forwards, where will football analysis go next? Obviously this is speculation. If I knew exactly where it's going to go next, then I'd do that. First of all, we need to know, first of all, it needs to broaden its scope. Currently, the top clubs, the top kind of Champions League level clubs, they have really strong analysis departments, but you move down the tiers and there's just less and less of it. In Scotland at the moment, it's still definitely a growing industry. The statistics you can get on Scottish football is reasonably mediocre compared to even, say, English League One. So that's going to be something that will happen more and more. I went to a course with a company called Prozone. Actually, they've changed the name from Prozone to Stats, which is possibly the dumbest name for a company I've ever heard, because you can't Google that. I just Google Stats. Anyway, they were saying that they had a talk with Turkish football clubs, and as a result, Turkish football clubs are now beginning to employ, I think they're making every professional club employ 2 analysts. So this is something that we're going to see across the world. More and more clubs are going to be doing this. But at the moment, we're looking at expected goals. These are individual events. What we would really like to do is look at proper team analysis, look at how this team works as a unit. mathematically, this is likely to start to use stuff like network analysis, which will move into the realm of computing, stuff that I don't really understand. But look at a team, how it works as a shape, look at where its weak points are. This is really where I think the next steps will be. In terms of expected goal style analysis, this we would unsurprisingly expect to have easy applications in any goal-based sport like ice hockey, basketball. They're basically football but slightly reshaped. But really we can apply this to any type of shot-based sport, for example darts, snooker, curling, which is everyone's new favourite sport after the Winter Olympics. Snooker is my favourite sport, and I think that I'd absolutely love to develop this, but it's all about getting data. So this is where it's moving forwards to in the future, and a little bit over time. That's everything I wanted to cover. So thank you for listening.